Hi, I'm Amy Carroll. Welcome to Arts in Indiana. I'm here today with Bruce Buchanan. He's a photographer and he's getting ready to exhibit his show called 10,000 Steps. Bruce, what brought you here to the Speedway Center for the Arts and what was your inspiration behind 10,000 Steps?
Well, I didn't walk here, though I do try to get 10,000 steps in every day. That's my goal. And unlike many photographers that have a vision of what they want to go shoot, I did that for years. Now I just kind of live my life and I take pictures if something comes in front of me. But I got involved with the gallery really because of our business and our involvement in trying to help
Actually, you're a great friend to the Speedway Center for the Arts. In April, was it April? The Flanner Buchanan, he's Bruce Buchanan of Flanner Buchanan.
Right.
And you were doing 135 years.
Yes, our company started in 1881. My great uncle was the first licensed embalmer in the state of Indiana.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm a fourth generation individual that when I turned 40, after being a professional photographer and photojournalist for 20 years, decided to come into the business. Actually, I diversified the business more than becoming a funeral director. I never did, but carrying on a proud tradition.
And for your 131st celebration,
Right.
135th celebration, you were giving away some monetary gifts to places that you felt did good things in small neighborhoods or in the neighborhood for each area, right? And I know that Jay Recker, the local director of the Speedway Flanner Buchanan site, he contacted me and said that he had chosen us to be one of the beneficiaries of that. And you guys came out and you were great to do that for us. And all of a sudden you kind of were walking around going, this is a great space.
Yes. Well, I like I mentioned, I've been an owner of Flanner Buchanan for 20 years, but I've taken up my photography just for personal reasons. And actually someone convinced me to have a gallery in Chicago last year. So I was able to exhibit on Michigan Avenue. Who can say no to that?
That's so amazing. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, but these are just for my personal walks. So that happened, and then I thought I really should have an exhibit here somewhere. And when I walked into this space, I said, this is the perfect space because it represents not only an emerging part of town, but a place that's trying to establish themselves. And what our business always does, it's kind of easy to be part of the big nonprofit groups and go to dinners. We like to get involved and drill down locally at all of our areas around the city where we can really have an impact.
And this is an excellent example of that. I mean, you've already been so involved in everything we do. You're one of the people that we always expect to show up for an open house, regardless of whether or not it has to do with Flanner Buchanan or photography. And we're always happy to see your face walk in the door, even when it's not even a big day. You're always there.
Yes, thank you.
So we're happy to have you. We're thrilled to have had this opportunity to have this exhibit, especially after being on Michigan Avenue, you said, up in Chicago. Wow, that's a great thing for anywhere in Indianapolis. And your 10,000 steps, like you say, it's about, I love the fact that you didn't have an idea of what you wanted to begin with.
Right.
So what are some of the things that surprised you that you did find about your own experience in documenting this?
Well, partially, as I said before, I did assignment work for so long, but what it taught me to do all sorts of photography, close-up, sports, portraiture, medical. I've probably had every technical challenge possible.
And you have started out, let's go back, you started out a long time ago in photography and the arts.
Right.
You went to IU.
I went to IU to get a degree in political science, thinking I might go into law or some profession, really the typical 16-year-old, 18-year-old that didn't know what they wanted to do. And I had a roommate there who was an editor for the yearbook. And he knew I had taken an art photography class for fun. He said, would you like to go shoot George Carlin at the auditorium as an assignment for the yearbook? And I said, would I? That would be really cool. Now, I'd never used a long lens before, and they told me that if Carlin heard the shutter click, I would be kicked out. So I had to shoot only when there was laughter, clapping, what have you. But that was a huge adrenaline rush.
I guess you didn't get kicked out.
I didn't get kicked out.
Did anyone else get kicked out?
No,
Oh,
I think everybody behaved. Everybody was so glad to be
Even
there.
Carlin? I can't imagine.
But that exposed me to the incredible journalism program at IU, and I saw other photographers going off to National Geographic, the big newspapers, and once I got a taste of that, it was just no turning back.
That's amazing.
So I didn't change my major. I couldn't wait to get out of school, and I went to work a small newspaper in Indiana and just kind of kept going from there.
What was the newspaper?
I worked at the Muncie Star.
Muncie Star.
Yeah.
Is it still around?
It is. At the time, they were owned by the same company that owned the Indianapolis Star.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's the
And
reason.
I think
to
I was
make-
one of the first college-educated photographers they ever had. So I had a lot of kind of esoteric goals for myself as a photojournalist that I think they struggled with that a little bit, and I did too. So I actually went back to grad school. I wanted to get into management, and I became a picture editor for the Times-Picayune in New Orleans.
Really?
Which was really
so
an
you went
exciting
out down there.
place.
That's a great
Yes.
place. Yeah. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, one of the pictures in my exhibit is something I shot just a few months ago
Yes.
during a driving rainstorm. And I kept telling my brother-in-law, slow down, I'm taking pictures, slow down. But that's in the French Quarter, and you can kind of get a sense, it almost looks like an impressionistic painting, but that's just the effect of all the rain.
Of the rain. So
Yes.
you didn't alter it. And
No.
do you ever alter any of your photographs?
No, I mean, things might get, I've worked
little
with
bit,
a
yes.
printer that might straighten the horizon or, something like that. But
But nothing
Pretty
dramatic.
straight.
You're pretty much going for
I was trained as a purist, in journalism, so.
And what's
yeah.
your favorite camera to use?
Well, I use, sitting right here.
Oh, good.
I use a pocket camera, sophisticated, I like to say, pocket camera. And it's just a Canon, very simple. I can carry this with me everywhere, all right? And the important thing for me is that I'm not carrying around a bulky 35 millimeter camera. I can now get great pictures, digital images with this. And it's got a movable screen. Sometimes when I'm shooting like in a crowd, I want to shoot candidates, I'll just shoot like this. And I'll look ahead and see where the scene is and just take pictures. But I just shot a picture of the gallery on my way in, and I wanted a shot up from the ground, so I can use the mirror that's here.
So the
and shoot up this
versatility
way.
is
So
nice with the
simplicity,
camera.
simplicity. Because I
Interesting.
always have this with me.
And so I'm assuming that when you first started photographs and things like that, that you used just film, just
Oh yeah,
regular old film.
I learned
Did you have your own,
on film and trays and
black room and things like
oh yeah,
that?
learning to load the cylinder clips in the dark, and you had to kind of back thread it, make sure it was loading. A great experience. And I worked for a while, while I was in Muncie, there was a photographer, a professor there, who actually was one of the greats in the 20s and 30s. And he taught me the difference between taking a picture, which is what I learned. You go out and you take a picture, you get in the activity and you take it, to making a picture. And one of the greatest stories from him was he lit an aircraft carrier from an airplane in the 1930s with 1,000 light bulbs. And he had a remote control to set them off. Well, on the way up, it went off by mistake. So he had to go back and reset every one of those flash bulbs,
gosh.
1,000 of them. So it taught me how to light. You don't really learn that as a journalist. You're on the run, you might have one strobe, the old 283 we all worked with. So it's been a really interesting progression of just learning. So even if I'm out in shooting a close-up of something, nature, I mean, I can reflect. If I got a yellow shirt on, maybe I'll use the yellow cast of that into the picture if it adds to it. Just have
So
fun.
all the details of that
Like I said
artistry.
before, I've learned so much over that 20-year period that now I don't need to use it. I can just use it if I want to.
That's a great tool.
Yes.
Those are great tools to have whenever you want to use them, not that you have to use them. So after you went to Louisiana,
Yes.
what did you do next after that?
Well, I met a woman down there. I got married. And,
Funny how that happens.
yeah, and I didn't really like newspaper work because I had the ambition to get into management. And picture people were on the picture desk or in the darkroom. They really didn't want them around the news table for decision making. And I thought, I want to be a manager, want to move up. So I just got out of the newspaper business and had my own commercial business. after I got married and moved to Milwaukee for a number of years.
What took you to Milwaukee?
Well, the woman that I met lived there, was an
You happened to
attorney
live
there.
Okay.
And we weren't sure where we were going to live, but it was harder for her to leave with her kind of established business.
Sure.
So I just moved up there, and her parents owned a printing company, which was good for me to have a studio in the back
Wow, that
when
worked
I first
out.
got started. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
So some of the way your photography progresses with some of the tools and skills that you learn, you said that you have multiples of those that sometimes you need to use, sometimes you don't. You just have them handy in case you need to. So
Right.
when you went to Milwaukee, you were able to see a little different change of things that you were looking at photographing and things like that.
Right. Well, when I was in New Orleans, I was a picture editor, so I was not photographing all that much. I mean, I was learning, I was involved, I had a few assignments. They sent me out on a helicopter to cover an oil spill once. But I didn't photograph much, so when I started my own business and made a recommitment to it, I had to really expand my understanding of commercial photography and work with larger formats, more lights. I lit, like I did some shots for a printing company that had those long roller presses that were about maybe 400 yards, I don't know, something long.
Big.
So I spent all day setting up lights and gels and all that sort of thing. I didn't really have any training in it. I just did
Just
it.
went with what worked.
I just did it and learned and spent a lot of time watching others when I had a chance.
But you got to meet some cool people too.
Oh, I had some great experiences. I spent the day with Magic Johnson for Miller Brewing, Bonnie Blair, who was that
the
skater,
speed
the famous
Speed skater, yeah.
Yeah, spent the day with her, and then another client hired me, I like to say, to stalk the Dalai Lama. I did. He wanted his picture taken with this individual, and he couldn't get permission, so we were going to try to do a chance meeting in Chicago at this convention. You know, we were one end of the room, the Dalai Lama and his kind of entourage bodyguard was coming from the other, so we saw the opportunity. We walked up to the middle of the room, and my client reached out to shake hands, and so I kind of looked at both the Dalai Lama and the bodyguard, and they didn't seem to care. I had to kind of gauge that first, because I didn't want the bodyguard coming after me. And it came off just smoothly, got off 2 quick shots, and we were done, and we all took a deep sigh of relief, because it was like, I think it was a day and a half. We
Oh,
waited
my
for this,
goodness.
waited for,
Wow.
you know, the appropriate opportunity.
So good karma.
It was good.
Good karma with
It was
the Dalai
good karma.
Lama.
What did Bill Murray say in that movie? Yeah, I got that going for me.
You got that going for you. You do. You do. Absolutely. So after you were doing that, you did that for a while in Milwaukee?
Right, yeah, but the interesting thing is my dad bought our funeral business when he had been a lawyer and had not gone into it, but my aunt was going to sell the business.
I didn't realize that.
This was in the late 1970s.
Okay.
And he did not want the business sold to a out-of-town corporation. So he bought the business. And then my brother went into it around 1980.
And your brother's Brian.
My brother's Brian. But I was many years off before I would even
Were interested
consider.
at all. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't interested in going into the funeral business or the cemetery business growing up, and we weren't around it, which is interesting. I mean, the way you get to 135 years is not always a straight line. But my dad thought maybe I would have some interest. He actually put me on the board of directors. So for a photographer, I think I got like $100 to go to a meeting. That was very
That's pretty
good.
good.
That was a good week's take back in the late 80s.
Okay.
So I like to say, you know, that as a camel, I got my nose in the tent early, and I kind of watched. And then I really enjoyed my photography, and it was probably not until the mid-90s I thought, you know, I think I can do some positive things for kind of the business side of it. Because we had these 3 different businesses. We had the funeral business, pretty large cemetery operation, and then a pre-need sales company. And I thought, well, why don't we find some ways to professionalize and combine some of the aspects of what we do? So, you know, my experience as a manager at the Times-Picayune, those sorts of things, I've always studied business, and
yeah.
so I was able to bring those skills. And I'm sitting here today looking back on the fact that my training as a photographer and a communicator is perfect for, you know, the celebrating of lives, and it's just all worked out swimmingly. But I hadn't planned on it, and it was incremental in getting into the family business. But I ended up raising my family in Milwaukee and commuting here for 20 years.
And I've heard that you've come like on Thursday or something like that, and then go back.
I
like,
did
or
a
whatever you need to
4-day.
do, I'm
I did a
sure.
4-day every other week for
Okay.
roughly for 20 years, that ended in the fall when my son went off to college. So we're building a house in downtown Indianapolis right now for a nice permanent residency where things will be convenient.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because
We're
these
glad
kind
to
of
have
things
you.
I didn't have time for.
So now
Yeah.
you're the CEO and owner of Flanner Buchanan.
Right, right.
And what do you find yourself doing as a photographer in that business? How do you, I like that you said, it's about communicating. It's all about communicating.
Yes, right.
And yeah, I'm sure that's a great thing. But how do you find that? How do you find yourself still being a photographer in that
Well,
business?
directly, I mean, one thing I've done is I've curated historic photographs for our locations, and I've looked for pictures that are more recent. And I just got an email from one of our directors yesterday. Someone came into our Decatur Township location on Kentucky Avenue and saw a picture of themselves, which was a picture I had copied out of a 1973 Decatur Central High School yearbook. And they went crazy. They loved it. And when people go to a funeral home, it's a sad time, oftentimes.
Sure.
It can also be a family reunion, a friends reunion, and very upbeat. But I wanted to give people things they could relate to, that kind of break the ice of the tension that oftentimes is around a funeral. And that's one way. Another is actually pictures that we use to celebrate people's lives. Not that I'm doing much photography in that area, but just the understanding of it, what we're doing online, how we bring pictures together. But then thirdly, I'm taking some of my photography and putting it up in our locations. As the owner, I have a little leeway to do that. But also, I'm in a financial position now that I can do things that I couldn't afford to do when I was a struggling artist. Like,
really?
Oh yeah, to put some of these gallery shows together, the cost, the time, and people don't know that, it is very difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
Very difficult.
Absolutely.
And if you're trying to make a living, for example, to do something like this, which is just personal, is a luxury. It would have been a total luxury for me when I was working around the clock to
because
put
it's
bread on
never
the
a
table.
given that you'll make money.
It's never a given. No.
Never a given.
No.
And I have to say, I enjoyed the show that you put together with the 100 years of Speedway at the local
Yeah, thank you.
Flanner Buchanan. And it just looked amazing. I think that's always great when anybody can honor that. And you took historic photos and that you found. They weren't necessarily things that you'd photographed, right?
Surprisingly, in Speedway, it was a little harder to find historic pictures because there isn't a historical society per se. So, I went to the newspaper and actually copied a lot of things out of their files. We found some old yearbooks. We have another display at our Speedway location that's all about the race. And I got wonderful pictures out of their archives, but if you're not looking for race pictures, old pictures of Main Street, things like that, much harder to find.
Much harder. So you had to work harder for that
I had to work a little bit, yeah.
I think we found a box for you somewhere in
You
the
did,
judges.
and I have that. We're going to donate that to, they're wonderful old factory
As
pictures.
long as they're not in a box here, I think it's great.
Yeah.
But they came from the basement of the Rosner building because when we
Yes.
were moving out of the Rosner building, everybody was like, we don't know what to do with anything. And I was like, I think these could be good for something.
Yes.
So my saving tech and hoarding techniques panned out once. Well, let's talk a little bit about your 10,000 Steps show.
Right.
And the pieces that you have there and why you've chosen them. What was because I'm sure you took more than what's going to be in the show.
Right.
What were some of those things that kind of
Well, it started because we live up in Broad Ripple, and I wear a pedometer. My goal every day is to get 10,000 steps. I like to be active. I don't like to run, so I want a little cardio workout, but that blends well with just my natural curiosity. So I've been taking pictures for years on my walks, and a friend of mine said, well, why don't you do a book of all your pictures of Broad Ripple? And I thought, a book? Oh, yeah, okay, that's a good idea. So I did a book and distributed it locally, and it kind of blends with my community development spirit that I have, outreach, and Broad Ripple has they have a nightlife reputation, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
But Broad Ripple has a wonderful vibe during the day. It's very picturesque. So I wanted the book to kind of combat the nightlife
So you wanted to show both sides, not just the one that everybody kind of gets the stigma, that gets the attraction there.
The subtitle is The Quiet Side of the Village. That's nice. I did that, and then I had that opportunity from Chicago, just kind of came out of nowhere. We knew that gallery owner from Milwaukee from years ago when we were raising our family. And so I had months to work together for that. Because the style of work I do, it might take me months to get a picture that I think is gallery worthy. I mean, every day I take something that's kind of nice, then I like it, and it means something to me, or I'll give it to someone if it means something to them. But for me to put something up on the gallery wall, you know, my standard goes up to my commercial highest quality,
yes,
right?
Yes.
It's hard. It's hard. But it was also a wonderful community gathering. I brought friends from Milwaukee, from Indianapolis. I had people walking off the street in Chicago. One gentleman who worked for the mayor's office came in. He said, you know, I've never been to a gallery opening like this. And he bought a picture, and that was really cool. And it's, for me, it's a combination community development event, social event, art event. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's what it always is about.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. Even Flannery Buchanan's about that.
Yes,
So
yes.
that's great. Any specific ones that you like more than others? Anything that brings back special memories with the pieces that you have?
It's hard to pick favorites because each
They're like your
week I
children.
have something and I'll see something, I go, this is it, this is my picture. And you know, I need to not look at it for a week or two. And if it stands up, but one of my
If it comes back to you and
if I look at it, I go, yeah, that really is a good picture, because artists have this emotional attachment. Mm-hmm. Artists, photographers, when they create something, their heart's in it, or they know what went into it. And when I was editing work in New Orleans in particular, when someone has to work hard to get a picture, they think it's a better picture than what it really is, because they know what went into it. So you have to sometimes show it to a third party and get a reaction. Because of the 26 pieces I put up in Chicago, I was lucky to sell 13. I mean, I was...
that's great though. That's a good ratio, yeah.
But the ones that didn't sell, I was thinking, oh, what? Those are some of the better works. But then I learn what people like, and if you're trying to sell works, it's not about you. And there are things that are in my exhibit that I never would have dreamed of shooting for years. I mean, kids, flowers, I didn't shoot that stuff as a journalist, right?
Right, yeah.
Now I'll shoot flowers and pretty landscapes and things that people like because it brings me joy, and I don't have that professional goal of trying to reach some imaginary standard.
I think what you said though is so important, and I say this too, and I struggle as a teacher with art myself. I'm sure everybody does, but I always like to say to some people when I'm doing something, I always say, if you're working really hard, you're probably not doing it right. And I think when you said, people think sometimes when they work really hard, it must be a good picture. And I think as we become artists, that's what we kind of realize. It's not about how hard you work. It's about maybe the magic or the feelings or the communication that comes through, that's when that happens. And that's when it becomes art. And the question I always ask the people sitting in the chair across from me when we do these arts in Indiana, when was it that you realized you were an artist and could kind of claim that title for yourself?
Oh, I had to be 8 to 10 years into it, at least. And I never was interested in photography like in high school, because the photographers, the limited few that I knew, they seemed to be like into the camera. And I was never into the camera. I'm not into the camera now. The camera is just a tool. And the best photographers that I've seen, they're trained in something. Their background is in something else. And because photography is not an extremely difficult thing to pick up. And now it's incredibly easy. But what you do with that, the basic rules of design that we all know, those things are, that's not about the camera. My son goes to school at St. Andrews in Scotland, and a lot of people have heard of the invention of photography. Well, St. Andrews, some photographers there was a doctor, there were some other people that actually helped the invention of photography.
Really?
So I've been in like their house or where this doctor was. It's a great restaurant now. But there's something magical about the chemical process that's gone, and I'm not nostalgic for it, but it was really wonderful to see an image come up on a tray. And when I worked in Muncie, I shot like 5 assignments, and I couldn't wait to develop the film, see what turned out, because there was no proofing. You just hoped everything worked. You hope you put the shutter speed at the right setting. All those technical settings had to happen. And then, I remember in grad school, I lived out in a very rural area, and I had to make film, make prints, and I took a bedroom on the back side of the house that didn't have any street light on it, and I had the big trays and the window open, and I'm making big 11 by 14 prints, and it's just
winging
incredible.
it.
But it's
Yeah.
just incredible. The developer was in the bathroom, and then I had the trays in the bedroom and the enlarger in the hall. I don't know, but it was pretty exciting. Pretty exciting. And all that's gone now. Everything I shoot is on my computer, well organized. My next book is probably going to be on espresso. Almost every time I have a cup, I take a picture of it, or the
That's
environment,
cool.
or the setting, or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
So it's just, like I said, my daily life. I like to see, I constantly see framing and cropping and color and light. And I have the luxury of time now to capture it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
As artists, we all change because of the ways that we work and what we do, and obviously you've changed a lot because of the changes in your work. In what ways do you think being a photographer changes the way you see light and life and the world?
Well, I think just as people, we understand ourselves as we mature. We understand ourselves better. So I understand things that I was probably doing reactively. Now I consciously understand that I'm doing it. And that's just part of the kind of the self-actualization, I think, of who we are as artists. So yeah, I'm constantly seeing light, framing, constantly. And when I'm out on a walk with my wife, for example, she is so used to me stopping or her looking back. She doesn't even look back anymore. She'll just kind of walk to where she wants to go. She knows I'm keeping an eye on her. But yeah.
But you're in that moment. You
I'll
have to check that out.
I'll stop and take a picture.
You have to look and see.
Usually it won't happen in 1 or 2 minutes. It might take me 5 or 10 minutes to complete something if I see something that really draws me in.
And so probably the tools that you talk about, they're often so instinctual, but now you realize, again, those are the tools I have. I can use them or not, and the way you see things is just one more tool in that case you carry as an artist.
Exactly.
It's great.
Exactly. I need to be polite, though, sometimes I'm with people, and I mean, I don't know if I stare, I probably do, but if I see a really interesting person, and I do take candid pictures still, if I'm in a restaurant or a coffee shop, and I'm very conscious of how I would ever use the picture. But I have wonderful candids of people in restaurants and things.
I always ask you, and you have the same answer every time I've asked, what's your favorite thing that you've ever photographed?
Well, you know, I see light and I see activity, and it's like I say, it's the next thing that comes along that the framing is interesting, the light's interesting, and sometimes the serendipity of it. I took a picture of a milkweed. And this is going to be in the exhibit. And I had some prints made, and I looked at them upside down. And so the little pods, all of a sudden, I had a choir, because all the little heads and all this stuff. So it's like anything can be interesting. And like I'd mentioned before, my background, having done everything from people to screws and nuts, technically I can kind of approach anything. So everything's wide open. One of my favorite pictures that'll be in the exhibit, I was having a glass of wine at a bar where there was like a speckled glass in the bar, and the light was coming up and it was reflecting in the wine glass. And I don't know what the waitstaff thought about me, but I kind of set that up and got a beautiful picture of that. Now, that's not something that I could have. Well, some people can kind of set those things up and pre-imagine them, but I'm more reactive, and that kind of thing gets me excited. So that was just me having a glass of wine after work. So what's going to happen tomorrow? I mean, it's that excitement of what I'm going to see tomorrow.
It's always the next thing.
It's always the next thing. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some great moments, and we're looking forward to your show. On August 27th is the opening reception. It's a Saturday night from 5 to 9 here at the Speedway Center for the Arts. And thank you for tuning in and sharing a few moments and taking some time to learn about your community with Arts in Indiana.